The smell of roasted yam wafted through the air as Amara sat on a wooden bench outside her mother's mud house, watching neighbors laugh and eat. Her stomach growled for the third time that day. It had been 2 days since she last had a full meal. Her mother, worn and frail from years of hawking vegetables, tried to smile through cracked lips. "Better days will come, my daughter," she always said. But Amara had stopped believing that. The weight of poverty hung around her neck like a curse, tightening with each sunrise. She watched a group of young women dressed in bright Ankara skirts walk by, their giggles loud and free. They didn't look hungry. They didn't look trapped. Amara knew some of them had sponsors, rich men who whisked them away in tinted cars and sent money to their families. It was risky, but they didn't starve. Amara wasn't naive, but she was tired. Tired of watching her mother sell tomatoes under the scorching sun for coins. Tired of skipping meals and sewing her only dress over and over. She wanted more. Not luxury, just peace. Just comfort. That evening, as the sun dipped low, a black SUV rolled to a stop in front of her compound. The windows were tinted, and the engine purred like a beast at rest. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Amara's heart raced as a tall man in a crisp white kaftan stepped out. He looked directly at her, smiled, and said, "You must be Amara. I've heard about you." The man's voice was smooth, confident, like someone used to being obeyed. Amara stood frozen, unsure whether to run or respond. Her mother emerged from the house, wiping her hands on a faded wrapper, her brows knitting with suspicion. The man smiled again and introduced himself as Chief Juraji. "Call me Chief Juro," he said, waving away formality. He claimed he was in the area to oversee a real estate project and had stopped by to greet an old friend, who mentioned Amara in passing. "They said you are smart and striking," he added, his eyes lingering a second too long. Amara's cheeks flushed with a mixture of flattery and fear. She had heard of men like this. Wealthy, connected, dangerous, if crossed. Yet, when he handed her mother an envelope and said, "Buy something good to eat tonight," her heart betrayed her with a thump of hope. Inside the envelope was more money than they'd seen in 3 months. Her mother hesitated but eventually nodded, a small thank you escaping her lips. Amara stood quietly, watching the power this stranger wielded just by showing up. Her instincts whispered caution, but hunger had a louder voice. Before he left, Chief Juro gave Amara a card with his driver's number scribbled on the back. "If you ever want more out of life," he said, "call me. I'll be waiting." The SUV roared away, leaving behind a trail of dust and tension. That night, Amara sat beside her mother, eating rice and chicken with trembling hands. The taste was heavenly, but her mind churned with unease. Was this a blessing, or the beginning of something darker? Days turned into weeks, but the card remained tucked safely inside Amara's pillowcase. Each time hunger returned or her mother coughed through the night, she would trace the edges of it with her fingers. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled above the tin roof and the food cupboard lay empty once again, Amara reached for the card. Her mother was asleep. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number. A deep voice answered almost immediately. "Amara." Chief Juro's tone was warm, expectant, like he knew she'd call eventually. He didn't ask questions. Within an hour, the black SUV returned, gliding to a stop like a shadow. This time, Amara entered without hesitation. The inside was lined with leather, and the air smelled of expensive cologne and control. Chief Juro smiled at her from the back seat and offered her a drink, which she declined. He asked about her dreams, her struggles, her fears. She found herself speaking freely, maybe because no one had ever truly asked. He listened, nodding like a patient king. Then he leaned closer and said the words that melted every wall. "You deserve better, Amara. You deserve to be taken care of." By the time he dropped her off, he had promised to help her mother with medicine, to send money weekly, and even enroll her in a local fashion school if she wished. Amara's eyes shimmered with possibility. He asked for nothing, only that she keep talking to him, keep trusting him. As she watched the SUV disappear again, she clutched the new envelope in her hand. It felt like fate had finally opened a door, but she didn't notice how quietly it had locked behind her. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Amara was no longer just the quiet girl with second-hand dresses. She was the one being courted by a rich man. The whispers came like cold winds behind her back. Envy from some, scorn from others. Her childhood friend Ifema cornered her one day after church, arms crossed and eyes sharp. "You think he's different? He'll chew you and spit you out. Men like that don't give without taking," she warned. But Amara, freshly dressed in a new gown gifted by Chief Juro, only smiled. "He's not like the others," she whispered. Her mother, though grateful for the financial relief, remained uneasy. "Money is a blessing, Amara, but not every hand that gives is clean," she murmured as she counted the bills that had paid for her medication. Amara tried to brush it off. Wasn't this what everyone wanted? A way out? She had tasted comfort now, the softness of a mattress with springs, the luxury of electricity that never flickered. She couldn't go back to empty pots and dusty corners. Still, in the quiet hours of the night, doubt crept into her thoughts like a slow leak. Chief Juro hadn't touched her. He hadn't pressured her. He only called every other day, his voice low and soothing, asking how she was and what she needed. But there was something about the way he always knew too much. What she wore that day, where she had gone. She chalked it up to his connections. Men like him probably knew everyone. When he asked her to meet his family next weekend, at his country home, her heart skipped. "You're different, Amara," he said. "I want you by my side forever." It felt like a dream finally coming true. But even dreams have shadows. The country home was nothing like Amara had ever seen. A sprawling estate with marble pillars, lush gardens, and a fountain that danced under the sun. Chief Juro's driver escorted her through iron gates and into a world that felt more like a palace than a home. She wore a fitted green lace dress he had sent earlier that week, her hair freshly braided, her palms moist with nerves. "You look like a queen," Chief Juro whispered when she stepped out of the car, his eyes gleaming with approval. He gave her a tour of the mansion. 10 rooms, imported furniture, art that probably cost more than her entire neighborhood. Every step she took made her feel further from the life she once knew. After dinner, as dusk painted the sky in warm tones, he led her to a glass gazebo by the rose garden. There, with the scent of hibiscus in the air and soft jazz playing from hidden speakers, he dropped to one knee and opened a velvet box. Inside was a ring that caught the last light of the sun and threw it in every direction. "Marry me, Amara," he said, his voice smooth but firm. "Let me give you the life you've always dreamed of. No more struggle. No more pain." Her breath caught. Wasn't this what every girl prayed for? A wealthy, handsome man offering safety, love, and escape? Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. He slid the ring onto her finger, and applause erupted from the shadows as his staff emerged, clapping like they'd rehearsed. Fireworks lit the night sky. Amara laughed through her tears, dizzy with emotion. She didn't know the chains had just been fastened, in diamonds. The wedding was the kind seen in movies. Silk-draped hallways, chandeliers like frozen fireworks, a designer dress flown in from Paris. Society's elite filled the golden pews, politicians, CEOs, celebrities Amara had only seen on TV. Her mother wept beside her, not from sorrow but disbelief. A girl who once borrowed salt from neighbors was now marrying a man whose shoes cost more than her annual earnings. Chief Juro spared no expense. The food was endless, the music rich, and the press cameras flashed like stars. Amara smiled until her cheeks hurt. She barely recognized herself in the mirror. Glowing skin, lined eyes, flawless makeup. She looked perfect. But inside, a small voice whispered, "Where is his family?" No one on his side had spoken to her. No cousins. No siblings. No one called her welcome. Just silent, distant nods. When she asked Juro about it, he brushed it off. "They're abroad. Busy lives," he said. "You're all the family I need." As she lay in their honeymoon suite that night, the diamond-studded canopy above her and the man beside her already snoring, Amara should have felt bliss. Instead, her eyes remained wide open, counting doubts instead of sheep. After the honeymoon in Mauritius, Amara moved into the mansion permanently. It sat on the city's outskirts like a silent fortress. High walls, security cameras, and guards who barely blinked. The inside gleamed with sterile perfection. Every vase in place, every light cold and white. She tried to walk freely, but some doors wouldn't open. Staff quarters, Juro explained. Nothing for you to worry about. Her bedroom was bigger than her childhood home. Yet, she missed the noisy morning rooster, the scent of fried akara on the street, her mother's humming. Everything here was quiet. Too quiet. Staff greeted her with polite bows but never smiles. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Juro left early and came home late. When he was present, he was kind, but possessive. He chose what she wore, what she watched, even how she wore her hair. "You're mine now," he'd say with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. The house had luxury, but no warmth. Amara began to wonder. Had she walked into a palace or a cage? Their first night back in the mansion was strangely tense. Juro had been charming during the honeymoon, gentle even, but something shifted once the plane touched down. He barely spoke during the drive, and when she reached for his hand, he pulled away as though distracted. That night, she waited in their grand bedroom, dressed in the satin nightgown he picked for her. When he entered, he didn't smile. He stood at the door, staring at her as if sizing her up. "Turn off the light," he said flatly. Confused, she obeyed. In the darkness, his voice came again, low and cold. "You belong to me now. Everything you do reflects on me. Remember that." The warmth she'd felt during their courtship evaporated. He made love to her like a duty, not desire. No tenderness, no words, just control. She lay still afterward, blinking into the darkness, her heart cold. This wasn't love. This was performance. The next morning, he kissed her cheek and placed a wad of cash on the dresser. "For whatever you need." Amara looked at the money, then at his retreating figure. Her throat tightened. Something had changed, and it terrified her. The following days brought new instructions. "You're not to leave the compound without my permission," Juro said over breakfast. "If you need something, ask Musa, the driver." He also handed her a list of rules, curfews, guest restrictions, a diet plan. She laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. When she questioned the restrictions, his face hardened. "You don't question me, Amara. This isn't the market square." The staff began to act differently too, watching her, reporting her movements. The mansion's beauty began to feel like camouflage for a prison. She tried to speak to him gently one evening. "I feel alone. I need some fresh air, maybe a visit to my mother." "You'll get used to it," he interrupted, eyes fixed on his phone. "Everyone does." Amara realized then that she was no longer a woman, but an object, an accessory to be polished, placed, and silenced. Her every move was monitored, her every emotion dismissed. The freedom she had fought for was now behind invisible bars. The mansion's staff moved like shadows, silent, alert, and eerily obedient. Amara noticed how none of them ever laughed or joked. She once tried making small talk with the cook, a woman named Janet. Janet only nodded, eyes wide with fear. When Amara asked where she lived, Janet stammered, "Inside, we all stay inside." "Inside? Always?" Amara peeked into the staff quarters once, just a narrow corridor of small, windowless rooms. It smelled of bleach and silence. That night, she asked Juro why the staff never seemed to rest or go home. "They're paid well to stay quiet and loyal. That's what matters," he said, his tone clipped. Amara began to feel like she was being watched not just by cameras, but by people whose eyes were trained to never blink. Conversations ended when she entered a room. Sometimes she'd hear muffled crying from behind closed doors. She once tried to comfort a housemaid trembling in the hallway, but the next day, the girl was gone. Juro said she had resigned. Amara knew better. One afternoon, while exploring a hallway she hadn't entered before, Amara found a door that wouldn't open. Unlike others, this one wasn't labeled or ornate, just plain, wooden, and locked. She turned the knob, jiggled it, even knocked. No response. Later, she asked Duro about it casually. His smile faltered for half a second. "Storage," he said quickly. "Nothing important." But that door gnawed at her thoughts. Something about it felt forbidden. That night, she tiptoed through the dark corridor, ear pressed to the door. Faint sounds. Scratching? Breathing? She backed away in fear. The next morning, she found the hallway blocked by a tall security guard. "Private area," he grunted. Loneliness became a daily ache. Amara tried calling her mother several times, but the line was always bad, cutting out, full of static. When she asked to use Duro's phone or internet, he waved her off. "Too many scammers these days. It's better you don't make external calls for now." She tried using the landline while Duro was away. It rang once, then silence. Again. Nothing. She asked Musa, the driver, to take her to her mother's house. He frowned. "Oga say you must call first." "But I can't reach her," Amara said, her voice shaking. Musa simply shrugged. "Then wait." Even letters she wrote and gave to Janet were never answered. "I gave it to the gate," Janet whispered one day. But later, Amara overheard a guard mocking her words. "Letter?" That one ended up in the fire pit. Panic settled in her bones. She wasn't just cut off. She was being erased. Each room glowed with golden chandeliers, each corridor lined with imported rugs, but it was all a facade. Amara had never felt more trapped. Her outfits were chosen, her hair styled by a silent maid, her outings scheduled. Even her meals were monitored. If she didn't finish them, a report was filed. Duro grew colder by the day. His affection came in small gestures, diamonds, perfumes, branded shoes, but no love. Only control. One evening, during a dinner party for his business partners, he introduced her as "my latest investment." Laughter followed. Amara smiled on cue, but her heart shattered. She was beginning to see the truth. She wasn't his wife. She was an ornament. A pretty thing to display in gold and silence. And the walls of her cage were getting smaller. Amara couldn't sleep. The mansion was too quiet. She wandered the hallways like a ghost, eventually finding herself near the forbidden wing. That door was still locked, but something else caught her attention. Voices behind a slightly ajar office door. She crept closer and peeked. Inside, Duro was speaking to a man she'd never seen. "She doesn't suspect anything yet," he said. "Keep monitoring her. We'll make the switch soon." "Another one?" the man asked. "Just like the others," Duro replied. Amara gasped, covering her mouth. "Just like the others? Who were they talking about?" Suddenly, Duro's head turned toward the door. She fled down the corridor, heart pounding. Something was deeply wrong. And now, she knew. She wasn't imagining it. The next morning, Duro kissed her cheek and left like nothing happened. But Amara couldn't unhear those words. She tried to flee, dressed in flats, a shawl, and a hidden stash of cash. She slipped past the courtyard, toward the front gate. But two guards stood waiting. "Madam, Oga say you no fit pass here," one said, almost gently. "I need to see my mother." "It's urgent," she pleaded. They didn't budge. Back inside, her room had been searched. Her drawer emptied. Her cash, gone. Her suitcase, missing. Later that night, Duro walked in holding the shawl she had dropped. "You're not ready to leave yet," he said, smiling like a father scolding a child. "This is your home now. Forever." Amara's blood turned to ice. Amara began to sense it. Eyes that followed her every step, even when she was alone. At first, she blamed her nerves. But then she noticed patterns. The flicker of movement in mirrors, the shift in shadows, the barely audible click whenever she entered a room. Someone, or something, was always watching. She began leaving objects in strange positions. Lipstick across the floor, a comb angled against the door. Every time, she returned to find them moved. Adjusted. As if someone had come in and left no trace. She tested it further. Scribbled a note and hid it beneath her mattress. "I am not safe." Help me." The next day, it was gone. No one mentioned it, but the maid who cleaned her room no longer made eye contact. Her tray of breakfast came late, and her dresses smelled of bleach. The worst moment came one evening when she stepped into the bathroom and caught her own reflection, blinking late. Her real eyes had blinked, but the reflection hesitated. It blinked afterward. She screamed. Duro came rushing in, pretending concern. "You must be tired," he said, holding her shoulders. "You've been under stress." He prescribed sleeping pills the next day, said it was just anxiety. But Amara knew what she saw. Something was watching her, and it was starting to play games with her mind. The basement was something out of a nightmare. Amara had always assumed it was simply for storage, a place where the mansion's unnecessary items were kept, old furniture, dusty boxes. But she had never been allowed near it. Duro had made it clear. "Stay away from the basement," he'd warned, his voice laced with something unspoken. Her curiosity, however, gnawed at her relentlessly. One evening, when Duro was out, she waited until the house was quiet and made her move. The stairs creaked beneath her weight as she descended into the gloom. The air grew heavier with each step, thick with the smell of mildew and damp stone. The faint glow of a lone light bulb swayed above, casting eerie shadows on the concrete walls. At the bottom of the stairs, a thick metal door stood ajar. Amara's pulse quickened. Inside, shelves were lined with bottles of chemicals and jars filled with strange objects. A medical table stood in the center, its surface stained and covered with a white sheet. She felt a sudden chill crawl up her spine, her legs stiff with fear. But then, something caught her eye. A mirror, cracked and dusty, leaned against the far wall. As she moved closer, a flicker of movement in the reflection stopped her in her tracks. She froze, heart hammering, and stared at the mirror. There was something in it. No, someone. A figure hunched in the corner, just out of sight in the real room, but clearly visible in the reflection. It was a person. Pale. Silent. Amara spun around, but the room was empty. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she stumbled back. What is this place? The mirror was the key. She knew it, but her fear held her in place. She couldn't leave yet. Not until she understood what Duro had been hiding. Amara couldn't shake the feeling that there were too many things she wasn't being told. Too many unanswered questions. The basement, the strange reflection, the locked doors. It was all leading somewhere. But where? The next day, as Duro left for one of his business trips, Amara had a rare moment alone in his study. It was a massive, imposing room, filled with leather-bound books, portraits of people she didn't recognize, and furniture that looked far too expensive to be comfortable. Her eyes wandered over the desk, the walls, the bookshelves. There, tucked between a stack of paperwork, she saw a framed photo, a woman, standing on a beach, her face radiant, her hair windswept. She looked familiar, but Amara couldn't place her. She was dressed in an elegant white gown, much like the one Amara wore on her wedding day. Her smile was too perfect, almost eerie. The woman was beautiful, almost too beautiful. Her eyes, though, were empty, lifeless. Amara picked up the photo carefully, her fingers trembling. There was something about the way she held the picture, an unsettling sense of ownership. This wasn't just an old photo. It was a recent one. And the woman in it wasn't just some stranger. She was someone Duro knew intimately. But who was she? Was she another one of his wives? A former lover? Her heart began to race. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. She couldn't breathe. She looked at the photo again, the smile mocking her, and felt a wave of nausea wash over her. What was going on in this house? And how much of it had Duro hidden from her? Just then, she heard a car pull into the driveway. Duro was back early. She quickly returned the photo to its place and walked toward the door, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The lies were starting to unravel, but would she be ready for what they revealed? Amara tried to keep herself together, but the pieces were slowly slipping out of place. Each new discovery was more disturbing than the last. She couldn't shake the feeling that the town, the very people who lived in the shadow of Duro's wealth, knew something she didn't. It was time to seek answers. One morning, she decided to visit the local market. Her heart pounded with a mix of anticipation and fear. She hadn't left the mansion in weeks, and she needed to see her mother, to reconnect with the world she had left behind. She wore a simple dress, her hair tucked into a headscarf, trying to blend in as much as possible. As she walked through the cobblestone streets, the usual hustle and bustle of market life seemed muted. People went about their business, but when they saw her, their eyes quickly darted away. The vendors' voices were lower than usual, their greetings forced. She approached an old woman selling vegetables, her mother's age, and asked, "Have you seen my mother lately? Is she well?" The woman's eyes widened for a split second before she looked down at the ground. "Your mother is fine, child," she mumbled, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you should be careful. Some things are better left unknown." Amara's heart sank. She reached into her purse, pulled out a small envelope with money for the woman's goods, but the woman refused it. "Take care of yourself, dear," she added, looking over her shoulder nervously. She turned to leave, but the whispers followed her. It was like the entire town knew something she didn't, but no one dared speak openly. No one was willing to say the truth aloud. As Amara walked through the market, it felt like the walls were closing in. What had Duro done to this place? The closer she got to the mansion, the more she felt the weight of her isolation. The town was silent, and the silence spoke volumes. The silence at the mansion had become suffocating. Amara felt the weight of her isolation more than ever, like every inch of space was closing in on her. The house, which had once seemed so grand and luxurious, now felt like a tomb, cold, lifeless, and filled with secrets. But the silence wasn't just external. It was something she could feel in the air, something that gripped her from within. Her evenings with Duro had changed. He no longer spoke with the same sweetness he once had. He had become colder, more detached, as if he were watching her, waiting for her to break. It was a game now, one she wasn't sure she could win. One night, after dinner, she tried to speak to him. "Duro, I want to go out. I feel trapped here. I need to see my mother again, to see something familiar." He didn't even look up from his phone. "You don't need anything. Not anymore. You've got everything you could ever want." Amara's heart tightened. His words were meant to sound comforting, but they only served to deepen the coldness inside her. She stood there for a moment, unsure of how to respond. But before she could leave, he grabbed her wrist with surprising force, twisting it just enough to make her wince. "You are mine now," he growled, his eyes narrowing. "Don't ever forget that." Her pulse raced as she pulled her wrist free, trying to ignore the sting of his grip. His words echoed in her mind, but she knew better than to argue. She had learned by now that defiance only made things worse. That night, she lay in bed, her mind racing. The mansion was filled with everything she had ever dreamed of: luxury, wealth, comfort. But it was nothing compared to the suffocating emptiness that surrounded her. She stared at the ceiling, her heart heavy with the realization that she had traded one prison for another. In the darkness, she heard something, a muffled sob coming from behind the walls. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A cry. Someone was crying. Someone who was just as trapped as she was. Her heart skipped a beat. Who else was suffering in silence within these walls? Exploring the mansion yet again, trying to find a way out of the suffocating walls that had become her cage. It was a fleeting moment of rebellion, a quiet defiance against the life that had been imposed on her. She wandered the long corridors, passing rooms that were always locked or unwelcoming. She had already memorized the house's layout, but today, something drew her to the library, a room she had never really explored. The library was vast, shelves overflowing with books, some old, some brand new, all carefully curated. She ran her fingers over the spines, scanning titles that ranged from architecture to philosophy. But then, something caught her eye, a leather-bound diary, wedged between two thick volumes on ancient medicine. It was too conspicuous, too out of place in such a pristine room. Amara hesitated for a moment, the warning voice in her head urging caution. But the desire to know, to uncover the secrets of this house, overpowered her. She opened the diary carefully, her breath catching as she read the first page. The handwriting was elegant, almost too refined, but the words were haunting. They don't see me. They think I'm just a guest. But I know what happens here. I know what this house has become. They don't know that I remember. Amara's fingers trembled as she turned the pages, each one more unsettling than the last. The entries were dated, years ago, decades ago, some even from the time before she was born. The voice in the diary spoke of secrets that had been buried beneath the mansion, of souls trapped in endless cycles of torment, and of a man named Duro who had done more than just build his empire. The final entry was the most chilling of all. It will all start again soon. I feel him watching me. If you find this, run. Don't let him make you his. Don't let him take you into the depths. Amara slammed the book shut, her heart racing. The diary had been written by someone who had been here before, someone who had tried to escape, just like her. But what had happened to them? What had become of the person who had written this? She felt the weight of the truth crash down on her. Duro wasn't just some wealthy businessman. He was something far darker, far more dangerous. And now, she was trapped in his web. The days that followed were marked by a growing sense of unease. Amara could feel herself slipping, her grasp on reality becoming more fragile with each passing moment. It was as though Duro's grip on her mind was tightening, manipulating everything she thought she knew. He had always been controlling, but now he was deliberate in his actions. It started with small things, her keys going missing, her shoes moved from where she'd left them. At first, she thought it was her own carelessness. She had been distracted lately, after all, with everything going on in the mansion. But then it became impossible to ignore. One evening, she found a vase in the living room knocked over. It wasn't broken, but it was clearly out of place. Duro was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. She picked it up, turned to him. "Duro, I didn't leave it like this," she said, her voice steady but anxious. He glanced up, his eyes cold. "Of course you did, Amara. You've been distracted lately, haven't you?" His words were gentle, soothing, but they didn't match the sharpness in his eyes. "It's understandable. This place, it's a lot to take in." The way he spoke made her feel foolish for even questioning him. The confidence in his tone, the way he almost believed it, made her start to doubt herself. Maybe she had moved the vase without thinking. Maybe she was imagining things. The next day, another small thing. Her favorite book was gone from the shelf. She searched for it, feeling the panic rise in her chest. But when she asked Duro, he just looked at her with that same, unreadable expression. "You've misplaced it," he said softly, his tone almost patronizing. "I'm sure you'll find it. You're just under stress." The truth was slipping away, and with every denial, every dismissal, Amara felt her confidence erode. Duro's gaslighting was becoming more insidious. She had never been a paranoid person, but now she wasn't sure of anything. Were the things she remembered real? Or had she imagined them? By the time she noticed a few of her things, her clothes, her personal belongings, disappearing from her room entirely, she realized with growing dread. He wasn't just controlling her actions. He was erasing her. He was making her doubt herself, until she questioned her own sanity. As the days blurred into weeks, Amara's isolation became absolute. It was like she was disappearing, her connections to the outside world growing weaker with each passing day. The mansion had become a strange, hollow place, its walls closing in on her like a trap. The staff had become even more distant, if that was even possible. No one spoke to her without Duro nearby. No one looked her in the eye. She had been erased from the community, made invisible by the very people who once served her. But it was the sudden disappearance of the women from her past that haunted her the most. Her old friends, Iffy, Joy, and the other girls from her neighborhood, had completely vanished from her life. She tried to call them, but the numbers were disconnected. She had even tried to visit their homes, but no one answered the door. The few people who did look at her, neighbors, shopkeepers, always acted like they didn't recognize her, as if they'd been told not to. One afternoon, Amara couldn't take it anymore. She had to know if it was just her imagination or if something truly sinister was happening. She needed answers. She made her way to the one place that had never let her down, her old friend Ife's house. Or, at least, it had once been her house. When she reached the address, her stomach dropped. The house was boarded up, the yard overgrown, a for sale sign planted crookedly in the front yard. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Where had they gone? A few houses down, a man in a suit was speaking to an older woman. He was talking in a low voice, but Amara caught his words, "She'll be next." His not letting anyone get close. The words felt like a punch. "Who's next?" she whispered to herself, feeling the cold hand of dread settle deep in her chest. She didn't know who the man was, but she recognized that name. He. The way he spoke about her, about the others, made it clear. Juro's grip on this town, on everything, extended far beyond the mansion's walls. The reality of her situation hit her hard. She was no longer just trapped in a house. She was trapped in a web of lies, manipulation, and dark power. And everyone she had ever known, everyone she had ever trusted, was gone. They had all vanished. Amara's heart raced as she backed away from the window, her mind reeling from what she had just overheard. She couldn't move fast enough, her feet stumbling over the cobblestones as she fled back to the mansion. The words kept echoing in her mind, "She'll be next." Who was she? And who exactly was Juro, if he had such control over the people in this town? The puzzle pieces began to fit together, but each piece was darker than the last. When she arrived at the mansion, something felt different. The house seemed quieter, more oppressive than ever before. The air was thick, as if it had absorbed too many secrets. Amara walked through the grand hallway, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings, searching for any sign of change, of something out of place. As she entered the kitchen, she stopped dead in her tracks. There, in the center of the room, was a large, dark stain on the floor. At first, she thought it was some spilled red wine, but as she moved closer, the smell hit her, a sharp, metallic odor that made her stomach twist. The stain wasn't just wine. It was blood. Her mind raced as she looked around, but the kitchen was eerily empty. No one had come to clean it. No one had explained it. The stain was fresh, still damp, and there were dark, smeared footprints leading away from it. Amara knelt to inspect the marks on the floor more closely. Small, deliberate steps that looked human. A sudden chill ran down her spine. She knew this wasn't an accident. She had heard rumors about Juro's darker dealings, the ones he never let her ask about. But now, with the blood on the floor, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in horrifying clarity. Juro wasn't just a controlling man. He was dangerous. He had secrets buried deep in the mansion. Secrets of people he had used and disposed of, just like he was using her. But who else was he hiding? What had happened in this very room?